This is Audiobook Caboodle YouTube channel. Click on the subscribe button and listen unlimited audiobooks anytime, anywhere.
Part 3 of Lives of Two Cats by Pierre Loti, translated by M.B. Richards. Section 7. As soon as the treaty of friendship was signed between this cat and myself, anxieties arose within me concerning her future. What could I do with her? Carry her to France over so many thousand miles and difficulties innumerable? To be sure, my home would be for her the unhoped-for asylum, where the short, mysterious dream of her little life would pass with least suffering and most peace. But I could not see, without forebodings, this sickly, ill-robed foreigner, the fellow resident of our superb Pussy White, so jealous, who would certainly drive her from the premises as soon as she appeared. No, that was impossible. On the other side, to abandon her at our next port of call, among chance new friends, that was equally impossible. I could have done so had she been vigorous and beautiful, but this melancholy little creature, with her human eyes, held me to her by a profound pity. Section 8. Our intimacy, founded on mutual loneliness, constantly increased. Weeks and months passed on the never-resting seas, while all remained the same in the obscure corner of the ship where Pussy had chosen her abode. For us men who sail the seas, there are always the strong winds that buffet us, the starry nights on deck, and the goings-on shore in foreign ports, always some event to break the monotony of sea life. She, on the contrary, knew nothing of the vast world over which her prison moved, nothing of her kindred, or of the sun, or of verdure, or of shade. And, never going outside, she lived in the solitude of my narrow cabin. It was a glacial place at times, when the door swung open to the fierce wind sweeping the decks. Oftener it was a hot and stifling furnace, where Chinese incense burned before the expatriated idols, as if in a Buddhist temple. For companions in her musings, she had monsters in wood or bronze, fixed to the walls and grinning with malicious laughter. And in the midst of a mass of relics of things sacred in her country, pillaged from dwellings and temples, she wasted away, without air, among the silken hangings that she loved to tear with her restless little claws. As soon as I entered my cabin, she would come forward with her soft, welcoming cry of joy, springing like a jack-in-the-box from behind some curtain, desk, or chest. If by chance I seated myself to write, she, very slyly, very tenderly, seeking protection and caresses, would softly take her place on my knees, and follow the comings and goings of my pen, sometimes effacing, with an unintentional stroke of her paw, lines of whose tenor she disapproved. The shocks, the pitchings of the ship in rough weather, the noise of our cannon, gave her great terror. At these times she threw herself against the walls, spun around like a mad creature, after which she would stop breathless and hide herself in the darkest corner with a terrified and sad expression. Her cloistered youth resulted in an unnatural state of invalidism, becoming daily more and more pronounced. Her appetite continued normal, but she was emaciated. Her face grew, if possible, more triangular, her ears pointed sharply and bat-like. Her large golden eyes sought mine with an air of distress, uncomfortably human-like, or with questionings on the problem of life, perhaps equally troubling and far more unanswerable to her little intelligence than to my own. She was very curious about outside matters, despite her unaccountable determination never to cross the threshold of my door, and never failed to examine with extreme attention any new object brought to our common lodging, probably giving her confused impressions of the foreign ports where our ship called. In India, for example, I remember she was once deeply interested, even to the total neglect of her breakfast, in a bouquet of fragrant orchids, so extraordinary to her, who had never known garden or forest, never seen other than the withered or dead flowers in my bronze vases. As an offset to her rough and discoloured fur, which at first sight gave her a gutter-cat air, she was finely formed, and the least movement of her delicate paws was of patrician grace. While watching her, I sometimes fancied her some little enchanted princess, condemned by wicked fairies to share my solitude in this lowly guise. And I called to mind a story of the mother of the great Genghis Khan, which an old Armenian priest of Constantinople, my teacher of the Turkish language, had given me to translate. The young princess, Ule Malik Kurekli, doomed before her birth to die if she beheld the light of day, lived shut up in an obscure dungeon. And she asked her servants, "Is this what they call the world? Tell me, is there anything else outside these walls? Is this tower in something?" "No, princess, this is not the world. That is outside, and very much larger. And there are also things they call stars, that they call sun, and they call moon." "Oh," replied Ule Malik, "let me die, but let me see them." Section 9. It was at the close of winter, one of the first warm days of March, that Pussy Chinese made her debut at my home in France. Pussy White still wore at that season her royal winter robe, and I had never seen her more imposing. The contrast would be the more overwhelming for my poor favourite, lean, lank, with her faded fawn-coloured fur looking as if moth-eaten. I felt myself much embarrassed when our man Sylvester, returning with my pet from the ship, lifted, with a half-disdainful air, the cover of the basket where he had placed her, and I saw, in the midst of the assembled family, my little Chinese friend creep tremblingly forth. Most deplorable was her first appearance. I felt the impression of the group in Aunt Clara's simple exclamation, "Oh, my friend, how homely she is!" Homely indeed. And in what way, under what pretence, could I present her to the magnificent Pussy White? In utter helplessness, I had her carried, for the time being, to an isolated granary, that I might gain time to reflect on the situation. Section 10. Their first interview was certainly terrible. It was unpremeditated, a few days after, in the kitchen, a locality of irresistible attractions, where the cats of the same household do what one can to prevent will some day meet. The servants summoned me hastily, and I ran to the battlefield, where, uttering unearthly yells, a shapeless package of fur and claws, formed of their closely clinched little bodies, rolled and bounded, shattering glasses, plates and dishes, while tufts of white fur, grey fur, black fur, and fawn fur flew and floated everywhere. It was necessary to interfere energetically and instantly. To separate them, I threw upon them a whole carafe of water. I was at my wits' end. Section 11. Breathless, scratched, and bleeding, her heart beating as if it must break, Pussy Grey was gathered to my breast, where she clung closely, growing more quiet in the consciousness of sweet security. Then she became less and less rigid, and as limp and inert as if dying, which is a way cats have of showing entire confidence in one who holds them. Pussy White, seated, thoughtful and gloomy in a corner, looked at us with surprised eyes, and a deduction from the view was formed in her little jealous brain that she, who from one year's end to the other had driven from the neighbouring walls all other cats, unwilling even to endure their presence, must acknowledge this ugly pagan as mine, since I held her so tenderly, so closely. Then it became necessary that she, Pussy White, should tolerate her presence in the mansion and trouble her no more. My surprise and admiration were great to see these two, an instant after, pass by each other, not merely with indifference, but calmly, civilly, and all was ended. During their lives, they never quarrelled again. End of part 3.
This was Audiobook Caboodle YouTube channel presentation. We hope you enjoyed listening. For full audiobook, check out our playlist section. Links in description below.